you Google these states, there are many cities in that state, but there is one particular state that really stands out from all the cities in that state. And this city is known for a horrific murder that happened on one Sunday evening. And the city I'm talking about is Villisca, and the state is Iowa. Now, I'm pretty sure you've heard of this story before because it's pretty famous, or let me say, like famous in a dark way. But if you haven't heard of the story, the long delivery version of this story is that we have this, devoted Christian family who lived in Villisca and, was loved by everybody, and, everybody liked them in the community. But one Monday morning, neighbors woke up and everyone in that family was, murdered, including the couple and their kids. And till today, the mystery has not been solved. But, there are some fascinating conspiracies concerning this mystery, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. So if that's of interest to you, please hit that subscribe button and also hit the like button, because this is the kind of videos I upload every single week. And so without further ado, let's get straight into the video. On December 6, 1989, Josiah Moore was 21 years old and had been dating Sarah Montgomery, this young, beautiful woman, for a couple of months. And so that was the day they ultimately, arranged to get married. And truly, they did. Josiah got married to Sarah on December 6 at the home of her parents. The couple live in Illinois, US, but they decided to, move to another state, and the state happens to be Iowa, because most of Josiah's family lived there in a small town called Villisca. And so they both agree to move to Villisca. The couple lived together in, a rented place, but Josiah was this, hard-working guy, and Sarah was also supportive of him very much. And so in 1903, that was about 4 years after getting married, they ultimately had the money to, afford a house. And so they did. They purchased a house that same year. The house was this modest home, like a farmhouse, a very peaceful home that was used as a farmhouse for the previous owners. And they were really appreciative of it because they had finally been able to purchase a house. It was a 2-bedroom, about 6 square feet, and had a living room, a downstairs sewing room, and a kitchen, and an outhouse. It had a barn next to it, and overall the house was pretty decent. But that will all change after they went to the special program. By 1912, the couple had 4 children: Herman Moore, who was 11, and then Catherine, who was 10, and Arthur, who was 7, and Paul, who was 5. And on Sunday, June 9th, the children had a special program that evening, since they were Christians. And so after they had returned from the church that morning, they quickly did their home chores and then, prepare for the program. Now, Catherine was the only female among the children, and she had friends who also attended the same church, kind of family friends. And so Catherine, invited them over to join them so they could go to the program together. And these were 8-year-old Ina May Stillinger and her sister Lena Ketru Stillinger. The sisters, were members of a wealthy family who lived in a farmhouse about 7 miles outside the town. And so around 6 p.m., Josiah called Stillinger's family home and then asked their older sister if the girls could stay overnight because, after the program they couldn't return. They were just kids. And so her sister agreed and told the kids' parents. Around 6 p.m., the Moore family and the Stillinger sisters went to the children's program together, including Sarah, their mom, and then Josiah himself. After the program ended at 9:30 p.m., the Moores and the Stillinger sisters walked into the Moore's house, arriving between 9:45 and 10 p.m. Now, it isn't exactly known whether they drank something or ate something when they arrived, but this will later raise a lot of questions in the story, so let's continue. They went to bed presumably around 10 o'clock p.m. The next day, which was Monday morning around 5 a.m., Beckham, who was a next door neighbor of the Moores, went out to hang laundries after washing, just as the sun was rising. And so she finished hanging her clothes and went into the house. She was expecting to see the Moores family because they normally wake up very early, and the family were also very noisy. Not in a bad way, but given that there were 4 children in the house, and so She normally heard them every morning when they were awake, but that morning she didn't, and so she just assumed that maybe they weren't awake yet. Maybe they are very tired from the program they went the previous day. But by 6 a.m. she still hadn't heard from them, meaning they weren't awake, and it was Monday morning too, so the kids were supposed to attend school, and so she became a little bit concerned about why they were still sleeping. By 7 a.m. she became increasingly concerned, because to her it was a bit odd looking at the time the Moors wake up every single day to do their chores. And not only that, their horses were restless and other animals they had hadn't been fed. So she went and knocked on their doors a couple of times, but no one responded. After nobody still answered, she attempted to look inside the window, and once again the windows were also closed. She tried the front and the back door to open and then see if they were there, but both were locked. At this time she was just not getting it, so she reached out to Josiah's brother via phone. Josiah's brother himself was not home, so his wife was the one who picked up the call, and then she spoke to him and then asked her if maybe the Moors were ill or maybe they had traveled or something. And Josiah's brother's wife would say, "No, I don't know if they are ill or had traveled. They didn't tell us anything like that, and so we have no idea." And so Beckham said, "Okay, let me call his store. Maybe they might have left to the store." But calling the Moor store, Ed Selly, who was the shopkeeper, would say, none of the Moors had been at the store that morning. And so Beckham just kept calling other family members because she was, very concerned. And at 8:15 a.m., she got hold of Josiah's brother, who was Ross Moore. Ross lived just a couple of walks away from, his brother Josiah. And so when Beckham reached out to her, he didn't hesitate. He came, but just like Beckham, he also knocked the door a few times, but no one responded. He shouted, but no one responded. Ross had a copy of the front door keys, and so he brought it out and then opened the door and then let himself in while Beckham stood outside the porch. As Ross entered the house, he didn't see anything wrong. There was just nobody in the living room, so he went into the living room and then opened the guest room door. But what he saw right away was just straight out of a horror scene. He just couldn't stand it, and so he quickly ran out without even looking twice and then told Beckham, "You gotta call the marshal immediately." It would later turn out that what Ross saw in the room was the dead body of the Stillinger sisters, which was Ina and Lena Stillinger. After Marshal Hancockton arrived at the house at around 8:15 a.m. after seeing blood on the bed and the downstairs bedroom, which was what Ross saw, he also went out of the house immediately and called Dr. Clark Cooper, a physician. When Cooper arrived, Horton and Cooper and a Presbyterian minister named Mr. Ewing entered the room together, and what they discovered was so gruesome and so shocking. First they stepped into the dining room and then into the first floor bedroom, and true, there were two bodies in that room. They saw two girls according to them. One was a big girl and the other was small, and the girl was out to the outside of the bed and next to the east side, with his head facing the north. She had evidently moved after having been struck or had been moved. They also discovered that the blood was all scattered over the pillows. Apparently she had been struck on the head and squeezed down the bed, perhaps 1/3 of the way. According to them, her left hand was thrown back and was taken up below the pillow, and her head was all beaten in. But what makes this particular murder so gruesome is that the girl had been struck with an axe, but the edge of the axe had come out of the forehead, so you could see the sharp edge well on top of the side of the head, which means she was struck in by the edge of the axe, not the back like her sister. And her sister's head was also all beaten in. At first they were not able to recognize the Stillinger sisters. According to Dr. Williams, Ina looked familiar, but she was so mutilated that he wasn't able to identify her at that time. After they continued the move upstairs, the situation just got worse. The horror still continued. When they got to the upstairs bedroom, Mr. and Mrs. Moore were also dead. Josiah and Sarah's room was, facing towards the east with their head to the west, and Josiah lay on the left side of the bed on his back with his left hand on his chest and his face, terribly beaten in. And Sarah was, lying beside him. Also in the bedroom to the southeast, which was the left hand side, there was kind of a cot and another bed standing there with a little boy in it. He was sleeping on his stomach, and on top of his head was also all beaten in. He was also having kind of a gas undershirt on top of his head, which was, soaked up with blood, and it turned out that it was, Paul Moore, Josiah's little kids. Now, to the southeast corner of the room was another bed with a little girl, and her head was all beaten in. And on top of her bed was a little dress, and it was, all blood splattered, which was also partly curled, up over her head. And this was Catherine, the only female child. Finally, they discovered the older boys, Herman and Arthur, in the bed at the southwest corner of the room. The top of their heads were, described as all badly beaten in like the others, and blood spattered on everything, including the pillows they were on. After investigation by the Villisca Police Department, this was how they presumed the killer or the killers actually murdered the Morse family, since they didn't know if it was one person or a group of them. After the Moores and the Stillinger sisters returned from the church program and got home sometime after 9 p.m., the Moores added a twin bed into the downstairs sewing room so that, the Stillinger sisters could sleep there in a single twin bed. And then Catherine, their daughter, also joined her brother in the upstairs bedroom next to their parents. But after they had all gone to sleep, that was after midnight, someone who was this killer or killers who wielded an axe walked very quietly and slowly to the room where the couple, which was, the room upstairs. He opened the door very quietly and went to stand beside the bed of the couple and then raised the axe and then viciously attacked Josiah with it, which is like bludgeoning him with the blunt end of the axe while Josiah was, still asleep. He didn't stop there. He moved on to Sarah, who was just sleeping next to Josiah. And just like her husband, she was also struck continuously till, she fell unconsciously and died. Now, it isn't exactly clear whether Sarah was awake while all this was going on, but I think if there was only one person who was a killer, then she would probably be awake at that time. But if there were many, then maybe she wouldn't have heard, because the investigators believe she was killed in her sleep. After that, the killer turned left to the left side of the room, which was at the left hand side, and there was a cot standing there. He walked straight to the cot, and there was a little boy sleeping in the cot on his stomach. He raised his axe and then, using the blunt side of the axe just like the others, the killer viciously bludgeoned him in the head till he passed out. After that, he took a piece of cloth and then placed it on top of his head to kind of soak the blood. And this little boy was the 5-year-old Paul Moore. This killer or killers continued his killing spree. Now, in the southeast corner of the same room was another bed with a little girl. After he was done with, the little boy, he took his axe, walked close to the bed, and just like the others, he continuously smashed her head with the blunt side of the axe until, her head was completely beaten in and she died. And this girl was Catherine, the 10-year-old and the only female among the Morse kids. Just like the others, he also placed a piece of cloth to, soak the blood on her head. After he murdered all 4 of them who were in the same room, he moved to the room just adjacent the parents' room, and so quietly he walked in there, and unfortunately, there were 2 little boys deeply asleep on the bed in the southeast corner of the room. He got closer to the bed and viciously attacked them, also beating them with the blunt side of the axe until they both, ceased to exist. And these boys were Herman, who was 12, and his brother Arthur, who was 8 years old. The killer or the killers, then descended the staircase, which was just beneath the boys' room. And as they got to the kitchen, they made an immediate turn to the living room. Now, there was nobody in the living room, but he noticed there was another room in the east side of the room, and that was, the sewing room. And so gently and quietly he opened the door, and in the southeast corner of the room was, a twin-size bed. And deeply asleep on the bed were two young girls. He walked to the bed, and just like the others, he first plunging the little one to death on the head before moving to the other one. What is more gruesome and chilling about this old girl's murder is that the killer didn't use the blunt side of the axe, but rather the sharp edge, striking her multiple times in the head. And also it is believed that she was the only one who was awake and tried to fight back to save her life, but she couldn't. She was just a little girl, and the severity of her wounds was just unfathomable. In fact, she was so mutilated that at first glance the investigators couldn't even identify her. And these girls were the Stellinger sisters, who are Ina and Lena. After that, he covered both of their heads with a grey coat and then headed out of the room. But what makes this whole thing worse is that the murderer or the murderers didn't leave the house after that. The killer went back upstairs and then savagely attacked the already dead bodies of the Moss family, whacking Josiah an estimated 30 times and then rendering the others' victims' faces, unidentifiable with further beatings. In fact, the swings were so, savage and so extreme that they left marks on the walls and the ceilings of the room. He returned to the girl's room downstairs, where he left the axe, which was believed to have been taken from the Moss' own coal shed, and then leaned it up against the wall. After that, he washed his hands in a pail of water and then went to the kitchen. And what is kind of dark about this thing is that he made himself a plate of beans and tucked into some bread after committing such a horrible murder. Before he left, he locked the door with a house key behind him around 5 a.m. That is what investigators believed. And so that morning, when Mary Beckham, the next door neighbor of the mall, came knocking, the killer was already gone. And so sometime around 8:40, the town central telephone center issued an all-call alert advising every household in the town of the murders to stay indoors. But within minutes, the home of the deceased family became a full-blown spectacle. In fact, the house was just flooded with hundreds of people, whilst authority had not come for the bodies yet. All 8 bodies were still in place, and by the time authorities got there, all useful evidence was, already destroyed. Like, the people who came to the house literally touched anything, like including the murder weapon, which was the axe. And it is believed that some people even took some pieces of Josiah's cow as souvenirs before the police could secure the place. And so just from that start, all useful evidence was, contaminated, and the Villisca sheriff didn't get control of the scene for hours. And so remember, this was 1912. There was no such thing as, forensic testing, and toxicology study weren't a routine part of the autopsies at the time. So the investigation was doomed from the start. Nothing was stolen from the house, and none of the victims appeared to have suffered any type of abuse apart from, the hacking. But pieces of evidence were found around the barn, which included, imprints in the hay in the barn next to the knot hole, where they believe the killer observed the family for some time. They also found some cigarettes in the attic, which might mean that the murderer could have entered the house via the window of the back door and then hid until the family returned from the church. After the incident, several suspects were named, including Moore's former boss, who was named F.F. Jones, who some believed may have, hired a hitman to murder the family because he got angry after Moore left his company and, took a lucrative contract from him, from a company named John Deere. Another suspect was a man named, Reverend George Kelly. Reverend Kelly was a traveling minister in the town. Kelly suffered mental breakdown as, an adolescent and was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Now, the reason he was a suspect is that on June 8, 1912, he came to Villisca to, teach at the Children's Day, which the Moss family attended on the following day, which was June 9th. He left the town between 5 a.m. and then 5:50 on June 10th, which was hours before the bodies, were discovered. After police, questioned him and was charged, to which he said that, some demon made him do that. This was 5 years later, But the jury did not, believe his confession, and some believed that maybe he was forced by the police to do that, and he was never convicted. There was also a traveling serial killer whom the FBI believed the slaying of the Moss family could have been him, because there had been some similar murders in other states, and this was a man named Paul Mueller. He was an immigrant from Germany and also the sole suspect in the murder of a family in West Brookfield, which is Massachusetts. But he was never found or charged. Ultimately, no one was convicted of this disturbing crime. And so at the end, people just came out with, many conspiracies to, help explain this whole situation. Some believe it was just a serial killer who just felt like, killing and also found new victims every time. Others believe that maybe the Moss wronged someone and the person decided to take revenge. Others also believe that it was just a ghost who was summoned by somebody to take revenge. There are just so many questions than answers, and the murder still remains a mystery. So that would be it, guys. You can Google the Villisca Axe murder yourself, but I would recommend it if you don't have a strong stomach. Also, let me know what you think in the comment section, and don't forget to smash the subscribe button and also like the video, because I upload every single week. And so till then, see you in the next one.